and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes football webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper, along with Tribune football beat writer David Morrison. David, Missouri goes to Indiana, wins 45-28, a game we probably both thought was kind of a toss-up game. They end up winning convincingly, probably more convincing than that score indicates. So just let's begin with one interesting development in the game. Missouri comes out in the second half. They get Andrew Wilson back from a targeting suspension and show a little different look defensively than we've seen this year with 3 linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. And it did seem to throw Indiana for a loop, I thought. Just your thoughts on that little change and why you think they made it?
Yeah, I guess they said after the game that they had planned to go to it at halftime, before the game had even started. In game planning that week, they'd said, when Wilson comes back, we're going to go to this thing that certainly looked like a 3-3-5, even though Dave Steckel said today that it's just a variation on their 4-3. But yeah, like you said, they had the 3 down linemen, they had the 3 linebackers, even though they'd shift Andrew Wilson or Kentrell Brothers, who are on the outside of the linebackers, they'd shift them down to the line every now and then, but they never put their hand in the dirt. They'd always just kind of, be standing there. But, it was obviously a look that caught Indiana off guard. They were in, I think, 19 plays for 34 yards against it before they hit that 68-yard touchdown after Missouri had already gone up 38-14. And it really just got 5 straight stops for Missouri when the game was still in doubt and when they needed those stops, and it allowed the offense to get 10 more points on the board and really kind of put the game out of reach before it gave up that bust, and that touchdown. So it was obviously something Indiana wasn't expecting and something that Missouri executed very well in.
Missouri, I don't think had done that since last year's season finale against Texas A&M. So there's obviously nothing magical about that defense because Texas A&M didn't have much problem with it. But I think you're right; it did throw them off a little bit. I really thought in that game against Indiana, going into it, if you were game planning, you were probably just thinking, how can we buy a couple possessions here? Because we're probably going to score a lot if we can just get a few stops. If we can scheme a stop, then we're ahead of the game. And it turned out they schemed several stops. When they put it out there, they were winning 28-14, so that was a chance to get some separation, which they did. And I don't know, just going forward, if there's any inherent great advantage of playing 3 defensive linemen over 4. It's not like Missouri is loaded at linebacker and you're just dying to get those guys on the field more. I think they're roughly the equivalent, those 2 positions, as far as their quality. But in that game in particular, they were able to get some heat on the passer with just 3. And if you can do that, then why not do it with 3 instead of 4?
And it allowed them to send blitzes from kind of different areas, too, than Indiana was looking for. And they blitzed more against Indiana than they did in the first 2 games, probably combined. I would say they blitzed a lot more against Indiana than they did against Murray State and Toledo. And then, with a new look and with guys in different areas of the field in Indiana was expecting they could bring those blitzes from different places and kind of catch them by surprise that way.
Yeah, overall defense I thought played pretty well, better than the stats would indicate. They gave up a lot of yards, but I thought they played pretty well. They gave up 2 huge plays. I think at least once they got caught in a blitz and in a bad matchup. But I thought defense exceeded my expectations in that game. Offensively, come out of the gate, really almost looked like David Yost had intercepted their signals. They were going with a lot of empty backfield stuff early, just throwing the ball all over the place, even though the running game was working. Did a few different things as far as I thought. They didn't just use Dorial Green Beckham always as an island on the left side. They did some different formational things with him to get him more involved. He looked good. The passing game looked good. The only downside to the whole game offensively really was a couple interceptions, but when you throw it 47 times, you might have a few of those. Just your thought on what we saw from them offensively.
It's been kind of interesting to watch the offense get more complicated as the season's gone along, because it seems like Josh Henson has kind of added an extra layer almost in each game. Like in the first game, they barely did any empty backfields. The second game, they did 7, and then Saturday night they probably did more than a dozen. They were really leaving Franklin alone back there. They've yet to have a true 5 wide receiver set. It's always take the running back and put him out wide, whether it's Josie Hansbrough or Murphy. So they have 5 wideouts, but it's not 5 wide receivers, really, if that makes any sense. But, they've added the pistol in the last couple weeks. They're kind of experimenting with the speed option. They're starting to line Culkin and Waters, the tight ends, out wide a little bit more than they did early in the season when they were exclusively attached to the line in the first game against Murray State. So, I think it's kind of almost a laboratory for Henson right now, where he's going to try out some things in the non-conference season, see what sticks, and then kind of build off of that base in the SEC season, and then add more and more wrinkles to keep those defenses on their toes too.
Yeah, I think they end up with pretty good rushing numbers, so we'll see how much that translates to when they face better defenses. Indiana was sort of equally bad in all phases, so I don't think there was a right or wrong way to attack them. I think pretty much whatever you wanted to do was going to work. I think that'll probably be a similar situation this Saturday. And then when we get into the SEC games, we'll see if Missouri is the kind of offense that can bring it every week or if they're going to be more hit and miss. Lastly, like we said earlier, I don't think either one of us expected a blowout, but that's what Missouri did. Did that game affect how you look at this team? Is Missouri better than you thought a week ago?
I think so. I think it is better because the two big glaring deficiencies that came out of the Toledo game was the halfback run game couldn't get going, and the defense was very porous. It had trouble getting pressure on the quarterback, and it got beat by screens. And both of those things were shored up against Indiana. I think Murphy, Hansbrough, and Josie combined for 220 yards on the ground, something like that. And then they got pressure on the quarterback against Indiana, and Indiana threw probably 4 or 5 screens, and I think only one of them really worked. There were a couple drops, and E.J. Gaines hit one for a 4-yard loss, something like that. So they diagnosed and played the screens a lot better than they did 2 weeks ago. And like you said, they gave up 475 yards of offense, but I feel like this was the most complete defensive game they played, even though they gave up the most yards they have all season. So I think the defense is definitely making progress, and the offense has just kind of looked consistently strong throughout, except for a little bit of a, hitting the doldrums against Toledo for a couple drives.
Yeah, I do think they're a better team than what I'd given them credit for before, mainly because I thought their defense was going to have trouble even against a non-conference competition that's not the best. So they're a little better than I thought they were. I think maybe I went from thinking this was a 6-win team to thinking they had the potential to win as many as 8 without pulling off gigantic upsets. Now, I would say the odds makers are probably only going to favor Missouri 3 more times the rest of the year, and they've only won 3 games so far, so that adds up to 6. They may need to win a few mild upsets, but I think a game like at Vanderbilt, a game at home against Florida, maybe even at home against South Carolina, certainly those games are in play, which I might not have thought so much a few weeks ago. So they have the potential to have, if they could win 8 games this year, that would be a pretty big deal. I think a lot of people going in thought, well, it might be 6-6 or 7-5, but if you can push it out to 8, I think then you're pretty firmly getting the program back on some good footing, to where recruits aren't kind of wondering, is this your coach for the long haul or not? I think there are a lot of advantages to having a good, solid 8-win season versus squeaking into a bowl type season. So that's what's in front of them, and maybe after seeing what they could do on the road. The other thing about Missouri is the last few years, I haven't seen a huge difference in their level of play, home and road. They're not a team that's totally dependent on being at home. Even though they had a bad year last year, they won a couple road games. So they're a team that hasn't gotten too flustered by that. So that's another thing when you look at some of the toss-up games they're going to be dealing with, most notably the Vanderbilt game coming up in 2 weeks. That's kind of a good thing to have in your pocket. Next week, we will talk about what we did not talk about this week, which is the Arkansas State game, as we seem to have glossed over that. And then we look forward to Missouri's SEC opener at Vanderbilt.